welcome everyone to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place to hear authentic conversations from those who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer of Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women who work in digital and choose to share their knowledge, power, and connections. You can join the movement at togetherindigital.com. And today, friends, we have something special for you. Maryann Lombardi is here to talk with us about rehumanizing your networking, a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, as many of you know. She is the best-selling author and former executive turned business founder and a single parent to the coolest young adult on the planet. With over 2 decades of experience, Maryann is a sought-after expert in marketing, making authentic connections and leveraging resources to support others. In this episode, Maryann is going to share with us her wisdom on identifying and communicating your unique value, building meaningful relationships, and authentically navigating the digital landscape. Like I said, Maryann, we're having such a good conversation here today. She's also going to talk about how we can use AI to support your networking goals while staying true to yourself. Again, such good, intriguing stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Maryann, welcome to the Power Lounge.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Let's get this party started.
Absolutely. We are thrilled to have you here. But to start, I would love for you to share a little bit with our listeners about your journey and what exactly led you to become an advocate for networking and building authentic connections.
Yeah, so I often think that there are two kind of major themes for me. One is that I've always been kind of obsessed with the intersection between my life and my career and what relationship those things have to each other. And at the time, I don't think I would have ever called this work-life balance or anything like that, but I've always been really interested in where those two things are aligned or when they're not. And then the other thing is that I have an enormous amount of trust, interest, and faith in people, right? I just like people, and I'm interested in them, their behaviors, how they tick, why they do what they do. And those two things in alignment with each other have really been core themes throughout my work. And so for the past 20 plus years, I've been working for governments and institutions and brands and all this, bringing together these billion-dollar partners and leveraging their resources to do good for other people, whether that's help them get jobs, whether it's access mental health care, whether it's to grow their businesses. And I've had this weird trajectory where I started in New York City as a theater producer and a cabaret singer, and am now sitting at the founder and CEO of my own, consulting and coaching firm. Right. So it's been this very interesting ride, and I wouldn't have been able to do all of the things that I've done if it weren't for the people who I've interacted with, who helped me along the way. And I think that we don't give enough credit to the other humans in our lives that really either give us advice or feedback or introductions or support or those kind of things. And so I have a lot of care for that, right? Like I really love the support that people give and want to honor them for that.
That's wonderful. I love that collective experience and connections make up the whole of like who we are and how we can truly end up, I think, in the places that we're meant to be and doing the work that we're meant to do, I think, which is so ultimately where a lot of us like hunger to be. And I think where a lot of our listeners are working towards or maybe starting to be. And so I love that answer so much. And as you mentioned in that answer, you've worked with governments, institutions, brands, bringing together billion-dollar partners in order to help and support thousands of people. What is it that's helped you to successfully navigate these very different landscapes and foster what you're calling these meaningful collaborations? I think because oftentimes, when we're kind of moving in and out of roles and companies and opportunities, they can tend to feel transactional.
Yeah, well, I think often one of the challenges is, so most of my career has been about building partnerships, right? It's about, bringing people together to do big stuff, good stuff, whatever it is. And organizations are run by people, right? So people are at the helm of all of it. And I think that often we can get clouded, or we can get consumed by the idea that we're talking to organizations and businesses and brands and, right, like all this fancy hoo-ha, right? But the reality is there's there's an individual who's making a decision, and your ability to care enough about that individual, to listen to that individual, to understand that individual, and figure out what it is that they need. What kind of support are they looking for? Because everybody needs support. I don't care where they are and what they're doing. Everybody needs something. And I mean that in a positive way, not in a transactional way. We all need support to accomplish our goals. And so most of it, the way I've been able to do this work is that I really care to get to know these people, right? Like, and what they want and what they need. And so when you're at the intersection, most of the time, what I'm doing is I'm listening to all of the parties, right? And I'm doing a matchmaking game, because you're hearing what one person is interested in and what they need, and you're hearing what another person needs, and you're seeing how those two things can dovetail with each other and support each other. And so you're bringing those people together to, make something big happen. But it requires you to be willing to listen in the room more than you talk. And I think often people spend way too much time talking and not nearly enough time listening. And that's actually how you get shit done, quite honestly, is listening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So much good stuff in there. I think you're so right, because behind every single interaction, behind every business, behind every brand are people. Like you said, at the end of the day, I think I learned this very early on, working on brands like P&G. Even though I was a creative director, oftentimes I was sort of shielded by fostering and growing relationships with my brand managers, because we had an account person in between. And I felt like the times in when I had the most success in sort of leading opportunities and kind of selling in some of my best work and ideas and sort of growing the account was when I had account partners that trusted me enough and allowed me to get to know the brand managers and spend kind of even one-on-one time with them, unchaperoned, as you might say, like God forbid a creative alone with an account person, right? To really get to understand and know who they were and sort of what motivated them, what were their personal and professional goals, so that when I was talking to them about the work itself, I kind of came at it in two different ways. I understood the business goals and objectives for the brand and the business itself, but also for them, as a professional and based on their personality. And I earned their trust and respect. And because of that, we sold in so much more work, which made the account person look good, right? Because now the business portfolio grew and the relationship grew. And I just think that there's so much opportunity when we stop, like you said, kind of thinking it of as all these formalities and just really start looking at the humans behind the business of the work that we kind of do day in and day out.
Yeah, and I think that there is this sense that we need some sort of cheat code or hack, right, to get where we want to go. And I get that, right? Like, we're all in this productivity mindset, and how do we make it more efficient and more? And we can talk about the role AI has in doing all of that, right? But the reality is, at the core, foundations are it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, foundations are the core of it all. And the basics of caring for people and listening to people and doing your best to understand people is it. It's not complicated. And we want to try to make it complicated. It can be difficult, right? There's a difference between complicated and difficult, right? But it's not actually complicated. And I think people make it more complicated in an effort to avoid doing the difficult work, which is connecting with people, which is doing that care and interest and, listening and understanding.
Exactly. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think this is so true too when it comes to sometimes difficult or challenging people. I think sometimes the more intention you can take and time you can take in listening deeper and sort of looking for those opportunities to show that you're listening a little bit harder than everyone else, sometimes softens those folks a little bit more. Because it's like, I think sometimes they don't know how to always communicate what it is that they truly want and need. And then when you show up in that way, they're like, oh, wait, wow, Maryann actually gets me.
Yeah.
And she's actually listening. And so all of a sudden now you have earned that deeper trust and respect. And then all of a sudden you have this new sense of, I don't want to say freedom, but yeah, a little bit of leeway with that person now. I feel like this is how in the past I have, and I wouldn't call it a hack or a cheat, but it does kind of feel like that in a way. But it does take time. Like you said, it takes
Yeah.
time, it takes intention, and it takes listening. But I love that.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, like sometimes we get too sensitive to the idea that people are like their personalities may be different, or they may be gruff, they may be grumbly, they may be intimidating. They like there's all sorts of things that that may be at the surface of the individual, right? And so we can get distracted by that surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, I always find that I remind myself that the person I am talking to is not me.
Yes.
They are not responsible for like helping me understand them necessarily. It's my job to weed through what is happening around that's the front, right? Because a lot of people will have a front. Like, what's at the front, right? Like, I want to open door number 1, right? And then I want to open door number 2, right? Like, I want to be able to get further, into this person and understand this person. And sometimes it requires me to allow them to be grumbly, let things bounce, right? Like, you don't know what's going on in their day. They may be grumbly for a really good reason. So, like, maybe I don't need to take offense to that right now. So it's just being willing to listen, even if people don't behave the way you want, sound the way you want, look the way you want, have the same politics that you do, have care about the same things you do, right? Because at the core, we're all human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I love that we've gone so deep so fast in this conversation, Maryann, because also I want to draw a line in the sand here and say this is the difference between being intentional about relationship building and creating diversity within those that you create deep, meaningful relationships with, and the difference between being that and a kiss ass. Right? Because being a kiss ass just means that you're going around and you're placating to people and you're not being intentional and you're not listening deeply and you're not taking action to sort of understand more intentionally, right? You're just kind of doing it to placate and you're just doing it to appease versus to understand.
Yeah. And in that way, you're also not aware of the big picture, right? Because there is I always think about to what end, right? Like, what is the end? To what end are we having this conversation? What is it that we're trying to get to? Where is the goal? What are we working toward, right? So to what end are we getting to? And so when you have the end in mind, it is much easier to make it through, the weeds and the complication and all of that kind of stuff, because you're focused on to what end, right? And if the what end is to get mental health care for free mental health care for a bunch of people who damn well need it, then you know what? I can handle a little grumbling. Right? Because I know exactly where we're going. I know you want to do it. I know I want to do it. We just have to figure out a way to get there because we both care about that issue. So let's get over our personal shit and like figure out a way that we can work together to make it happen.
Yeah. That leads very nicely actually into our next question. Again, I think it's so easy for us to go deep. You and I both spend a lot of time in this space on this topic. In particular, but this actually came up recently in a networking conversation and workshop that I was helping to facilitate. In your experience, what are some of the most common challenges that people face when trying to network authentically, and how can they overcome them? And I wanted to give a specific example, although we can come up with some others as well. But one that I heard recently was sort of kind of dovetailing off of what you just mentioned, which was, we were talking about networking and getting relationships extended beyond, your kind of general office relationships. And somebody had shared how it's really difficult sometimes when it comes to office gossip and sometimes politics, right? When you're trying to establish relationships, when we've got a lot of women facing, layoffs and things like that, but you want to lean on people that you've worked with in the past as possible references and things like that. How do you begin to foster those kinds of things sort of when you're looking at those types of behaviors and whatnot?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things. One is that it's helpful to think less about yourself and more about them. right? I think that is something that's very, very helpful. And often we lean in based on our needs, our wants, our insecurities, our fears, as opposed to going into a conversation focused on the other person, right? And listening and learning about their fears, their insecurities, their needs, their wants, and whatever, right? So I think one of the things that helps quell your insecurities is to focus on them and not you. The other thing is to focus instead on the things that you have in common and not the things that you don't have in common, right? Because often we are very aware of where we differ. We're very aware in either how we look different, how we sound different, our political things, our socioeconomic status, our whatever it is. And so we're hyper conscious of where we differ and less conscious about what it is that we share. And so often I focus on and try to help people focus on what are the things that you can identify that you have in common, right? That you can connect on and stay focused on those. And then there's also some just tactics around changing conversations if they're going down a route that you don't really want to go down, right? It's not like it might not be effective or useful to be talking about politics in this current, conversation that you're in with somebody, and you may be wildly passionate about it and you guys may disagree, but finding a way to divert that conversation back to a topic that is a little bit tamer for like the goals that you're trying to get to, right? So I think there's ways that you can divert conversations. And then the other thing is that you can also opt out, right? Like you don't have to network with everybody. You don't have to like everybody. You don't have to spend your time with everybody. People think that they have to network with the world, but the reality is smaller networks with deeper connections are way more powerful than wide networks that are narrow. This is partly why introverts are actually exceptional networkers, right? Because they tend to build small but deep networks, and extroverts often do the opposite. They build these because they can talk to anybody, and they build these huge, wide networks, but they're not very deep, right? So you don't have to be friends with everybody. I always run my relationships through a rubric, right? Like, is there interest? Is there care? Is there energy? Is there a vibe, right? And if those three things don't exist, right? If I'm not interested in them and they're not interested in me, if I don't care about them or they don't care about me, and care is like heart, interest is head, right? Then that's good to know. And if there is a really bad vibe, right? Like if the vibe check is off, right? If our energies don't match, if we're just like there's something off there, if those three things aren't there, I don't need to be connected. We don't need to be connected. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. It's not a match, right?
I think that's great. So many good little pieces there. I just wanted to reflect back for our listeners because I do agree. Like I think a lot of the things I've heard from people too, outside of like the office gossip and politics, I think great piece of feedback there. Hold space versus rather take up space when it comes to those instances. Focus on the ways we're alike versus the ways that we're different. But a lot of people talk about, the reasons why that they choose not to network or find networking kind of like a dirty word or difficult or awkward, or why they don't like it is awkward. Time, rejection, those are sort of the things that people find challenging about it. So I do think, even still like holding space, looking for the common ground, going for the kind of more deep rather than the wide network, I think is really, really smart. And I think it's a more rewarding way to network, right? Because you always walk away feeling more filled than depleted, right? You kind of you're giving and receiving energy versus just being sort of walking into a situation where you completely feel like it's like a vampire situation where it's all the energy's been sucked out of you.
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to that idea of the reasons that people don't network, we have a tendency to lean into comfort as opposed to discomfort.
Yeah.
And that is to our detriment, right?
Yeah.
And so if networking is uncomfortable, it may be. But what is your goal? If your goal is to find a job, if your goal is to improve your life, if your goal is to increase your income, if your goal is to X, Y, and Z, you need people.
Yeah.
You need a network. You need community. You need relationships. If your goal is to have better mental health and not be lonely,
Yes.
you need community. You need relationships. So So I think being focused on what, again, back to to what end, understanding what are your goals, what is the, that's the kind of stuff that gets you through the discomfort, and acknowledging that the discomfort is there, but that's not a reason not to take action. It's not a reason not to do. It's a reason to acknowledge, because it's important for us to acknowledge our discomfort, because it tells us what we're afraid of, right? Like discomfort is fear, and it tells us what it is that we're bumping up against, and that's really good information, but it's not a reason not to take action. It's like, people think that things like self-doubt and insecurity and all of that kind of stuff means that you should shrink away. But the reality is, confidence isn't the lack of self-doubt or the lack of insecurity. Confidence is acknowledging your doubt and your insecurity and acting anyway. Right?
Yes.
You don't need to believe in yourself to be confident. You need to take action, do things, and you will discover that you begin to believe that your action will lead to results, right? Like, so we have it backwards, this idea that we have to be comfortable. We have to, like, I'm going on a tangent here, but I have such a problem with the whole believe in yourself thing, right? Because it's like, you have to feel comfortable before acting. And that's such the wrong message, right? You don't need to believe in yourself.
Right.
No, you need to take action, and you need to learn from that action, that if you continue to take action, you'll become more confident, because you're confident in your ability to take action.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You don't need to believe in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's a great tangent. We once had one of our speakers say, is it hard or is it just new?
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. It's just new. And then once it's no longer new, it's not going to feel so hard. And the first time is always scary. The first time is always scary that you ever did anything that ever was new or challenging or scary. And I 100% agree with you. I think I might have said it last week when I was interviewing our last guest, Yvette Simpson, and I was, saying something similar, that the self-awareness really is confidence. Being self-aware and understanding where your strengths are and maybe where some of your weaknesses are just allows you to go in with that general sense of awareness that, like, this is where I'm going to sort of struggle. And at least I can go in feeling a little bit more prepared, or a little bit more this sense of like general awareness of this is what I'm going to probably need to do in order to show up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I often tell people that networking is like sex, right? Everyone assumes that everyone else knows how to do it, right? Like, and some people look like they're going to be great at it, and others pretend that they're great at it, but really none of us get any good at it until we do it, right? And we practice it, right?
Yeah.
And networking is just like that, right? We have to just go do it.
I love it. I love the analogy. That is great. And I love this idea of, being intentional in goal setting, because I think it's true too. I was reading and doing some research on the topic, and, oftentimes, women especially do tend to network in places of comfort, in the sense that we don't tend to aim high when we're networking. We tend to network with peers and people that, maybe fall below us in like a hierarchy in the workplace, rather than sort of aiming a high. So, this wasn't a question that I had sent beforehand, but I would be curious to know what's some guidance that you would have for those who are listening, who maybe kind of fall into that space of, networking sort of in the spaces and places and with the people that they already feel comfortable with, but have a goal that would require them to aim higher.
Yeah, well, one, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that, because a lot of times, we can believe to ourselves that that's not what we're doing. So that honesty and that transparency with ourselves is a really a good motivator, right? So I think that's a piece of it. Yeah. Another thing that's super helpful is having a buddy. A networking buddy, right? Is that as almost like an accountability partner, is somebody that because you don't have to network alone, right? You don't have to go to these events by yourself. You don't have to do that. Is find somebody who has a similar goal than you do, and maybe has strengths that are different than yours, and vice versa, right? So I think that sometimes having a networking buddy will help you do that, so they can hold you accountable to the idea that, your goal is X. Are you doing Y? Because Y is going to lead you to X better than Z. So, having that kind of support from a team is really helpful in those kind of situations.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Yeah, I got to have my wing woman, which sounds funny because I know everybody sees me and they're like, oh, you're so extroverted and you're so great at talking with people. But it's like, no, it still takes energy and effort. And also I love bringing people with me, because I will tell them my goals of what it is that I aim to do when I get to certain events, and I will have them hold me accountable, because if I start to lose my energy I know that those that I bring with me will be like, okay, remember, Amy, how you said you were going to go talk to this person? There they are. Go, move your butt. Go talk to them now.
Yeah. Well, and I think along those lines, another thing that helps tremendously in this situation is and this will get to the value proposition, right? Like if you know what it is you bring to the table, that's super powerful in this process. And if you also know what your ask is, that ends up helping to hold you accountable too, right? Because a lot of times people will go into these conversations, they don't know how to talk about themselves and they don't make an ask. And you should always make an ask. And your ask, unless there's something like very specific, your ask should always be an introduction to somebody you don't know, right? The currency in networking is relationships, right?
Yeah.
Like it's people you don't know. So you should always ask the person you're talking to, hey, do you know somebody I could speak with about that? Do you have somebody you can introduce me to about X, Y, and Z, whatever it is you guys have been talking about? And what's great about that is that when they introduce you to someone, often they will introduce you to a person who is not the one you thought of and could potentially be at your level or higher, right? So this process of networking helps you solve some of those problems, right? Because if you're only reaching out to people you can think of, you're not actually expanding your network, right? So you always want to make an ask.
I love it. Yeah, let's get to that. Let's talk about the unique value proposition. How can our listeners identify and effectively communicate their own unique value or values in a way that resonates with others?
Yeah, well, I think there's two steps. There's understanding it and communicating it, which are two different things. So I think that the understanding it is often harder than the communicating it, because once you understand it, then it's really just shaping language and practicing that language, right? So, and people sometimes think it's supposed to be natural, but it doesn't have to be natural. Like you can literally come up with what I call a power statement, like I am this, I do this for this person, right? And practice it, right? Like practice your answer to who are you and what you do. But the big piece is you need to understand, what are your skills? What are your experience? Like what's been your experience? And what do you do differently than everybody else? And a lot of people get focused on their job title, and their job title has absolutely no use whatsoever. It's totally useless, right? What is interesting is your skills, and those are soft and hard skills. What are your skills? What's your past experience? And what makes you different? And so good, solid self-reflection is really how you find those things. And then you shape it into a conversation, right? But you have to start with those skills. Break down your job into what those skills are. Because everybody does something better than other people, right? And it's not, I don't mean it in a competition, but everybody's got a little secret sauce, right? We all have a thing that we do that is just different or better or unique or something that like stands out. And it doesn't have to be a hard skill. It could be a soft skill. It could be about like the way you make people feel, right? It could be like how you create belonging in your space. It could be around empathy. It could be around productivity or technology or these kind of things, but it doesn't have to be. But we all have our secret sauce.
No, I love that. And I think that's so true too, I would say, especially in our space in digital marketing and advertising, because digital coordinator, marketing coordinator, those titles could mean a million different things. So like when you say that title, it has absolutely, not to devalue what any of those people do, but it means a million different things. And you're right. I think when you start to look at your skills and you break them down, I guess my other question to that would be, when you're thinking about those skills, is it more about what you do well or what you want to be doing?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of those things, because if you are really solid in what you're doing right now and you're kind of maintaining, and that's what I think, sticking with what you do and you do better than anybody, I think is fine. If you're trying to shift like pivot, industry, and do a career change, I talk to a lot of teachers, for instance, and this is something that comes up for them all the time, right? It's like, how do you translate the skills that teachers have into this other arena, and how do I talk about what I do? It framed within the new industry that they want to work in, right? And so that requires a slightly different approach to talking about those skills, because you want to position it in a way that people go, oh yeah, I could see how, you working with thousands of kids and adults and, in the volunteer programs that you ran for your district would be helpful for us in our X, Y, and Z company,
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear how we don't often give ourselves credit for the collective experience, which is why I always like opening our podcast with that question of asking the women, our guests, to share their journey to see how that collective experience has sort of led to where they are now. And sometimes how that collective experience was absolutely necessary to get them where they are now so that they can hopefully reflect and see that their collective experience is what was necessary. That journey was what was necessary. Even sometimes like the pitfalls, the failures, the trauma was all a part of what helped get them to where they are now. So that they too can sort of reflect upon their journey. I think another exercise that was really cool too, that a friend of mine and a Together Digital member once shared, shout out to you, Andrea, if you're listening, was if you struggle sometimes to sort of give yourself credit for those things that you are naturally good at because you don't really just, again, give yourself credit for those sorts of things, ask others or pay attention to what others come to you often for, or you're just like constantly getting certain projects thrown your way that are maybe more like high pressured, or like for me, when I was still working in the agency world, I got pulled into every new business project. If it was something that needed conceptual work done or there needed to be ideas thrown at something, they came to me. So it's like I always knew that even though I was a great copywriter, creative director, that ultimately I always had lots of ideas to throw at things. So I was highly conceptual. And so if I wanted to tout that as a part of my capabilities or skills, like you said, that would be one thing that I would throw into there. So that would be a really great way to sort of reflect.
Oh, absolutely. Because there's so many people who will see things that, or be able to frame them and shape them in ways that you would never think. Right. And a lot of times there are things that we do in our day to day that we don't see as values that are, sellable in that way, right? Like that are things that could be skills that somebody else would want to use and package in that kind of way. So it's so great. It's great advice to have somebody else.
We take it for granted. We take it for granted because it comes so easy to us. It's like my husband, who's a mathematician. I would love to have the ability to do what he does, and it does not come naturally to me. But it's always been second nature to him. But again, we take these things for granted when it comes naturally. So it's a great piece of advice. So Awesome. All right.
Well, we also don't think about the value of those soft skills, right? Because we're focused very much on those hard skills. But often employers are actually, they need your soft skills more because the hard skills they can train you in. But they can't train you in empathy. They can't train you in that sort of team building kind of belonging kind of thing, how you motivate people, how you make them feel seen and heard and valued, right? You can't train somebody to do that. Yeah. So often you'll hear leaders talk about how if you don't have the exact hard skill we need, it's some of that, like a technology or a software or we can train you to do that, but we can't
hard
train
skills
empathy.
Can be taught. And I really love that that's starting to shift and change. That wasn't always the case. I really do love that because I think for the longest time, soft skills were diminished, especially because they're most commonly attributed to women. But you're 100% right. Hard skills can be taught. Soft skills are much, much harder to come by. All right. Building meaningful relationships is obviously a critical thing for both personal and professional life and success. One thing I've definitely noticed, especially since COVID, that all of us are being a lot more intentional about how, when, and where we're spending our time. And one thing that actually caught my attention and intrigued me, not just as a business owner that hosts and runs events, both virtual and in person, but like even in the music industry, like, I don't know if y'all heard this, like J-Lo canceled a bunch of her concerts for the rest of the year. And musicians are starting to double up on their concert events. People are being much, much more intentional about how, when, and where they're spending their time. So obviously networking, not as exciting as a J-Lo concert sometimes, maybe not.
Well, if you're networking with J-Lo, I think that would be different. Fire.
Fair. Good point. Good call. Maybe that's something we should look at. Maybe.
I know. We got to get that one done.
Let's get that going.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for cultivating genuine connections when folks are being that much more choiceful about how they're spending their time and who they're spending it with? Because again, I will say, another thing is I'm seeing groups like the AMA, the AAF, this is kind of all industry groups within advertising, marketing, and whatnot, and digital. They're struggling. They're really, really struggling when it's coming to like bringing people together and encouraging them to network. So yeah, what advice do you have for those folks?
Yeah, well, I think that one, there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like I mean,
Yeah,
yes, I don't
I'm cool
want
with
the
it.
organization. Yeah, exactly, right? Like I
Sorry,
think
guys.
it's unfortunate to have the organization struggle, but I also think it's an opportunity for them to be rethinking
Yeah.
about what their value is to their
Mm-hmm.
membership and what services, and everything is an opportunity,
Yeah.
right? And so we need to think of it in that way, as opposed to, oh, shame, why are people not doing what we want them to do? Go,
Yeah.
well, what can I learn from the fact that they're not doing what they used to? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not what we want them to, but what they used to do, right? Because as
Yes.
a business, your job is to serve a market. Your job is to serve a customer. Your job is to support what they need, not to do what you want, right? And
Yes.
so we tend to forget about that as businesses or whatever is, that things change, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
people's needs change. And our job as good and solid business owners is to be focused on our customer, not focused on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think that it's okay, right? Like I think that we all should be intentional about how we spend our time and who we spend our time with,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean that we should only spend time with people that we like and know, and right? We still have to branch out and spend, like, network well, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with that intentionality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think part of that intentionality needs to stem from the fact that, like, what are you doing with your time, right? How do you spend that time? Because your time is currency. And do you have a family that you want to spend it with? Are you doing hobbies? Are you, like, what is the value of your time to you, right? Like how do you value your time and your attention, and with whom, right? And so it's great for you to figure that out, so you're very clear about who you want, where you want to spend it, when you're not spending it with the people or on the things that fill you up, right, personally.
Yeah.
So I'm all for the intentionality of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those who are just listening to the podcast after the fact and not tuning in, listening live, they couldn't see my little praise hands that were going up for Maryann there. Because I wholeheartedly agree. It is, to me, I think it is this opportunity to reimagine, to revolutionize networking, to look at it in a new light in the ways in which we can come together. Because I do think that it's just this whole sense of, like, forcing people to do things in a way that felt disingenuine, that felt forced, that felt unnatural, in a time in our lives when we start to recognize and realize that time is short, and the
Mm-hmm.
ways in which we spend it are really, truly valuable. And we need to honor and respect that when people show up, that they showed up, and that we
Yeah.
should appreciate them, and we should appreciate that every time they do. So thank you, live listeners. Thank you, those who are listening to the podcast. When people show up, I don't care if it's 5, I don't care if it's 50, even if it's 500, like, every single person in the room now, I'm always so grateful when people show up. And it's just being that much more intentional about what's being said, what's being done, what kind of space we're providing, what kind of opportunities we're creating. Because again, it's like just realizing that lifetime energy, opportunity, it's all that much more precious. And how can we maximize it for those who are taking the time to show up and be in
Yeah.
the room? It's
Yeah. And
awesome.
it's so powerful, right, to think of it that way. And I think that this thing about networking suffers a bit from the
Mhm.
idea that it's so connected to business, right? And
Yeah.
business has always been a man's world, right?
Yep.
Like, and this isn't about being down on men. It's just about the reality, right?
Yeah.
Like the context, it matters. The context matters, that
Mhm.
we exist in a world that was designed and built around men's needs and the way men work and how they function, right?
Yep.
And so women are then in this world navigating that, right? And so when you try to do things the way others do them, the way men do them, and it doesn't work as well, right? And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for women to figure out how they want to network,
Yep.
how you as an individual want to network. If part of the way you network is, riding the train back together with a different person, than you
Yeah.
did the day before, and you guys talk that way, and if how you build some authentic connection is based on the moms group that you're a part of or the book club you're a part of,
Mhm.
right? Like that is networking, right? Like it. So if you just replace the networking word with building relationships, that's what it's
Mhm.
about. Like
Yep.
women have been building relationships since forever,
Yeah.
right? We are exceptional at it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's at the PTA or the book club or at the grocery store or the hair salon or we know everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could be an introvert or an extrovert. I got to tell you, women know people.
Yeah.
Because they're paying attention, because they need to know people.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that we have to sort of get out from this idea that there is this right way to network.
Yeah.
Right.
Agree.
And if you like playing tennis or something like that, like ask one of your colleagues who had a tennis racket you saw down. You know what I mean? I mean, like, do it the way you want to do it. You don't have to go to the happy hour. You don't have to play golf. You don't have to. Right? Figure out your way to do it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the only thing that we don't do is we just aren't as opportunistic about it. As you said earlier, we don't come in ready to talk about our value proposition, and we don't come in with an ask. We are great about connecting. We're great about giving, and we practice this within Together Digital. We practice our gives. We also really, really, really enforce that they ask as much as they give. And the asking is like, it's a muscle you have to build, because it's like you ask these women, what is your ask? What do you need? How can I help you? And they're like deer in headlights. Like, I don't know they don't know what to do, because they're not used to anyone asking them, what is it that you need? How can I help you? Right. And they're almost taken aback, maybe sometimes get a little choked up, because they're so used to just going it alone, figuring it out for themselves, that it just, they could ask for a million things, and then sort of like analysis paralysis, fear, anxiety, all these different things building up in them. You can kind of just see it in their face. But at some point they get beyond all of that, and they start becoming more comfortable in asking, either on our Slack channels or in their peer groups or at one of our events, because we just constantly are putting it in their face. What do you need? How can we help? What is your ask? And like what you said, have your value prop in your ask and your goal. So when you go in and you network, you're just constantly there doing it, and it becomes second nature. And it's just so funny, because when I talk to men about how they network and what they're doing, they don't have all the strategy. It's just kind of, they just don't even think about it. They just kind of do it. It's just a part of how they were conditioned, because it's just, they ask and they receive, and we don't get unless we ask.
Right. Well, and a lot of times they're used to people doing stuff for them.
True.
Right. Oh, so, God. Yeah, and again, it's not meant to be like, 100%. How dare they? It's just like, we're all conditioned. Right. Exactly. We're just all conditioned. Yeah. Right. And so it's easy to ask somebody to do something for you, because people have been doing things for you forever. So true. Right. Women specifically have been serving you forever. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. And then the only other thing I would add to that is, like, it's really helpful to be a good question asker.
Yes.
Right. Ooh, because and it really reduces the stress of networking if you start with a couple of really good questions.
Yeah, I love that advice.
And then it sort of gets the conversation going, and then can lead you into talking about yourself and making the ask. Because sometimes people get really like deer in headlights when it's like, you're coming right in, I got to do my value prop. Yeah. This is who I am. This is what I want. And then this is where I need help. It feels like inauthentic and like crunchy in a bad way. And it's nice if you start with a couple of really good, fun, engaging questions.
Yeah, I love going in. I like finding the lonely person in the room and asking them things like, what are you reading right now? Or how was your day? Or what was the last really fun trip that you took? Or something like that. And again, people love to talk about themselves. So yeah, just get curious about them and spend some time getting to know them first before you bounce.
Yeah, totally. Yep. Yeah, it makes everybody more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like you said, that genuine curiosity and that desire to get to know people on a more authentic level always kind of helps to kind of make it feel a little bit more real and a little bit less, like you said, salesy, crunchy. Yeah. All right, let's chat AI. Because how can you have any conversation in 2024 and not mention the words artificial intelligence?
Yeah.
Obviously, it's becoming increasingly prevalent in our lives. How can we leverage AI as a tool and networking and still come across as authentic? What kinds of tips and tricks do you got for us?
Yeah, well, I think, AI is spectacular and fascinating and terrifying all at the same time, right?
Absolutely.
And so, but it is something that we all need to understand and
Mhm.
learn and sort of engage with at whatever level we can do that in. So, one of the things that's so great about AI is its ability to write and its ability to engage with you in certain ways. One of the ways we've been exploring AI is with interview prep,
Okay.
with practicing conversations with AI around like those who may be nervous about talking in front of people and having conversations, is that
Mhm.
working with AI and prompting it to ask you questions, with the voice commands and have a conversation with you to practice. So there are really interesting ways that you can use AI to make you feel a bit more confident, to feel more prepared, as a tool for that purpose. There is nothing that AI can do that will solve the fact that you have to talk to people,
Yeah.
right?
Not yet.
So, yeah, but like, the more we get down that road,
Yeah.
the more powerful and valuable the authenticity is of the
Mhm.
face-to-face interaction, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we need to double down on the idea that the more AI grows, the more you need to talk to a human face to
Yes.
face. And it's
Absolutely.
not only good for your career and your
Mhm.
business, it's essential for your mental and emotional health,
Absolutely.
right? So that would be the biggest thing I think about AI,
Mhm.
is that
Yep.
the bigger it gets, the more you lean into the human to human,
Yeah.
right?
I wholeheartedly agree. I think there's a ton of studies and research showing, especially like Gen A, Gen Alpha, suffering from a lack of like social coping mechanisms, social
Mm,
skills, and socializing because of the amount of screen time that they receive. So while they're amazingly digitally native and tech savvy, which is really wonderful and amazing, at the same time, they really do struggle with social anxiety, understanding general social cues, body language, and whatnot. And a lot of it has to do, again, like we're going to be looking at obviously additional years of research because of COVID and isolation. What those things are kind of doing to like our youth, but even us as adults. I know that
yeah.
there was, I did a talk last year talking about how connection is a form of self care. And then us as
Mm,
humans, we need physical in person connection. And it can't just be like we can be alone, right? We can feel alone. There's perceived isolation. We can feel alone in a crowded room if we aren't connecting, like eye contact with others, feeling a sense of deep connection with them, perceived isolation. So even feeling alone in a crowded room for an extended period of time over time can be the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, can actually shorten our life by up to 15 years. And, what's wild is that you would think, in years past, a lot of the research shown, and this was all from the Surgeon General, would have shown that a lot of our elderly population fell into this, portion because a lot of them would be living alone or in nursing facilities where they spend a lot of time isolated. But no, it's like our Gen Z.
yeah.
It's our young kids. And that's just so heartbreaking because there's an easy fix there.
Yeah, no, there is totally an easier fix there. So it is scary, and it is something that we have to be very aware of. I,
Mhm.
I I think another thing that AI can do really well is that its ability to capture and take notes, right?
Mhm.
Because one of the challenges
Great
often with
point.
with networking is that we don't track the conversations that we're having, and
Yeah.
really smart networking is about the follow up, right?
Yes.
Because if somebody says, "Oh, sure, I'll introduce you to so and so," right? Following up with them to make sure that introduction happens, like politely and lovely, obviously, not badgering them to do that, but still, that if you have a conversation about a book that you read or something that you said you would send
Yes.
them, remembering
Mhm.
to send that thing, right? So, I mean, it's amazing how many people don't do the follow up,
Yep.
right? The thank yous and the follow ups are key.
Huge.
And so that tracking AI is
Mhm.
spectacular at,
Yes.
because it can keep notes for you. You can prompt it in interesting ways to put it where you want it and how you need it to,
Oh,
take notes for
100%.
you. So I think everybody should be doing
Agreed.
those intro AI classes, prompt
Yep.
generation classes, like learning
Yeah.
how to use those tools.
Make it your networking assistant and best friend. I
Absolutely.
agree because a lot of we've talked a lot about building your your personal brand. And a big part of that is growing your character and credibility. And part of that is, building a trust and establishing trust. And that means you follow through with what you're going to say. And all of us want to when we say we're going to do things. But then again, we're all busy AF. So when you say you're going to do something, sometimes you just need a second brain. Let that be AI. That leads nicely into this next question I'm going to move ahead to because we're running close to time. But you're a single parent, you're a busy business owner, so you've undoubtedly faced yourself a lot of challenges in balancing your personal and professional life. Outside of some AI tips, that was a great one. How else do you prioritize your self-care and maintaining a sense of balance when you're building your network or even just working on making time for networking? Because that's another thing I heard from a lot of women was just, time. I just don't have time to network.
Yeah. Well, one, I don't believe in work-life balance. I think it's a lie, right? There is no such thing as it, right? You have a life and your work's job is to support the life that you choose to live. And that's it.
Agreed.
Right. So for me, I see networking as essential to me living the kind of life that I want to have and building the kind of business that I want to have. And so therefore, it is not secondary. It is not something that I have to make time for. It is something that I do as a part of my day-to-day existence because I understand the value of it. So this whole thing about time, right, is a fallacy, right? Like, because we make time for the things that matter, right? And the things that generate joy, income, right? Or opportunity. Those are the things that we make time for. So, and if you want to grow in your career, if you want to grow your business, if you want to build deeper relationships so you don't feel alone, you have to connect with other people, right? So it isn't something you make time for. It is something that you put on your calendar and you do, right? It should not be secondary. And so that's how I look at it, right? Like I don't worry about making time for it because I do think it's essential to me living the kind of life that I want to live. And I think when it comes to the balancing the personal and the professional, I have always had jobs where I just bring my kid, right? Because when I first got divorced, a woman friend of mine, an African dance teacher, I remember coming in and my kid was like 3 at the time. And I was talking to her, we were running a program together and I was complaining. I was like, what am I going to do? I don't know how do I go to meetings when I've got my kid and she looked at me like, a lot of older women look to younger women. And she sort of rolled her eyes and she said, you bring them. And I was like, what? She looked at me like I was an idiot and was like, you bring your kid. And I was like, I can do that? And she was like, yeah, just bring your kid. All this idea about negotiating, can I do that? What's the right way to do this? What's she just cut through all that bullshit and was like, if you've got to bring your kid, you bring your kid. Right. And then if there's a consequence to that, you have to deal with that. Right. Like if somebody's upset or whatever, like navigate that in the moment. But you know what? You got to do what you got to do. Right. And be unapologetic about it. And so I've always had that in the back of my head that sometimes it may be awkward, but I bring my kid.
What an
and now
example.
Granted, my kid is 20, but now, but like back in the day, man,
behave.
Exactly. They just want the food, right? They'll go anywhere where there's food, but still, right? Like I think about that all the time. It's like whenever I worry about the way it's supposed to be, I go, nope, Marilyn Silla, man. She told me you just bring your kid. I'm like, okay, here I go.
Apologize. I love it.
Yeah.
That is great feedback. And I so much agree with you. I think because I've shared this story a lot in other podcasts that I've been on as well. And then I think the original episode for this podcast is, I'm not the founder of Together Digital. I was actually a member first. I often say they found me and I didn't know how much I needed community. I think that's another piece of social conditioning that we get as women, this message that we have to do it all and we have to do it alone. And especially when you kind of get into the space of leadership or running a business, I think especially there, I am always so floored by how many women are like, I'm okay. I'm really successful and doing well. I don't need community. I don't need peers to talk to. Wrong. You so need it. And because like you said, it's joy. It provides additional opportunity. It can help you continue to grow and be successful in the ways in which you increase your income if that's what you're looking to do. But honestly, for me, it really showed me that it was self-care, that every time we had an event or a meeting, I left feeling more fulfilled, more whole.
Yeah.
Even when we had board meetings, I left feeling more seen, heard, and fulfilled because I was connecting with women that were, in the same place as me, who were dealing with, caretaking, raising young kids, also balancing that plus their ambition, or just bad bosses at work or challenging clients. And there was just something so great about being seen and heard and understood, or just being able to just sit and cry. And then actually sometimes even having them cry with me because I am not a crier. So for them to even see me cry was already big. But then to have them cry with me was like, whoa, that was huge. Because again, it's like, as the big sister, as the leader, as the boss lady, as the mom, where do you ever get that space to cry?
The
much
shower.
less, right? That's usually it. And it's all alone.
Right.
But guess what? You don't have to do it all alone, ladies.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I've got a couple more questions, but I just want to throw it out there. I want to make sure I can see my chat in case anybody from our live listening audience has any questions. But I was curious if you could share a quick story with us or an example of a time where some authentic networking possibly led to a transformative opportunity in your career or your personal life. And then I've got one more question before we wrap it up if we don't have any questions from our audience.
Yeah, there was one introduction that actually changed the course of my life, and from a family friend. So I had a family friend who, after I got divorced, and while I was going through family court, I was trying to move from the state of Massachusetts to the District of Columbia, and I couldn't get permission from the court to leave. I was commuting from Massachusetts, DC for the job that I had because I had a consulting gig, and so I got an introduction to a gentleman at GW who ended up giving me, after this consulting gig, this full-time gig, which ended up unlocking my opportunity to move from the state of Massachusetts with my child, to start an entire new life. And so when I look at networking, I go, like, you were one introduction away from a life-changing conversation, and if I wasn't willing to ask and say, Mike, I'm desperate. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, but I can't find a gig. And Mike said, hey, you should talk to so-and-so. And I got on a call and so-and-so. And obviously, I have to do my job, right, in that call. But if he had not connected me, I can sit now and trace that back. Wow. But that introduction changed the course of my life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. And this is the thing, that our personal and our professional lives are intertwined, right?
100%.
That's the other thing that I hate about this whole work-life balance thing, is if there's some box you can put them in, right? So that's the one that always comes to mind.
I love it. I'm so glad we asked that question. I love that we are all one intro away from a life-changing introduction.
Yeah.
And it's so true. I wouldn't be sitting here right now doing this interview if it wasn't for networking and an introduction and a random person finding me on LinkedIn saying, hey, you want to connect and help start this thing in Cincinnati? I'm like, I don't know who you are, but sure.
But hey, why not?
Yeah, you never know. I love that. And again, I've said this so many times too. It's like networking happens anywhere, everywhere, all the time. Like you said, it's not just personal or not just professional, it's also personal. All right, Nicole would like to ask you a quick question. You said to think of what the other person needs when inviting them to chat. Can you give us one example of what a mid-level can offer to an executive?
Well, I wouldn't think of it like a mid-level to an executive. I would think about what you could offer that other individual, right? And this is where the listening comes in, is just getting to know that person, looking at their content, what do they talk about, what's going on in their lives, that kind of thing. I mean, I think that we need to break down this idea of hierarchy and just look at each other like individuals. So instead of looking at that person as a mid-level versus executive level, that's just a human, right? She's doing her own thing, having her own challenges, right? Like we all do. She just may happen to have a different position than you do. But I think we all have to sort of flatten it out and realize that we're all just at the same level.
I love that advice so much, Maryann. I think that goes a long way. I hope that goes a long way in helping to maybe minimize some folks' anxiety as well. Because I don't think I have no problem. I keep saying this. I have no problem with authority. But I don't necessarily put any one person on a pedestal. I really want to look at I want to treat every person as a VIP. I want every person that I walk up to and talk to feel like they are deserving of my time, my energy, and whatever it is I have to offer them in the way of help. And I think if you kind of come into it like that, Nicole, with everyone, people are going to feel so welcomed, seen, and heard by you, because honestly, you're not always going to know when you're talking to an executive. So if you kind of treat everybody in that way, you never know when you're going to open up a really nice door, possibly by just being that way.
Yeah, and it goes back to that idea of what do you have in common, not what are your differences, right?
Yes,
Like,
good point. Good point.
You may both be women, you may both have children, you may both be parents of fur babies, you both may have taken a trip to, Tanzania, you may both have lived in Peoria. I don't know, but like, what
Yes.
is it that connects you in some ways? Because we all have the same insecurities. We all have that. Just because you are in the C-suite somewhere does not mean you don't have the same insecurities that somebody else has, right? Like, we all are dealing with the same shit. And so we just have to remember that we are all dealing with the same shit.
Absolutely. Oh, Maryann, this has been so, so good. I could keep talking to you for a whole nother hour, but we are at the time. So I'm going to just ask this one last question. Nicole, thank you so much for jumping in and asking. We love it when we get questions from our audience. What is one last piece of advice that you would want to give to someone who is maybe still feeling a little stuck or overwhelmed by networking and building meaningful connections?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is breathe. Right. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing I would say is make sure you understand why it matters. Right. It's like, why do you want those connections? Yes. Do you want a new job? Do you, not want to be lonely? Like, why? Is just figure out the why, and it'll help you through that anxiety, because you just keep touching base on that why.
Agreed. Maryann, thank you so much for being here and for doing this.
Happy to.
Love these kinds of conversations. Again, such a big advocate for especially encouraging women to get out and to network and to grow their network in their community. We are just really so much better at it than we give ourselves credit for. I think we just need to really kind of look at it through a different lens, mindset, and light. So all of your advice today was just so wonderful, so helpful. So listeners, I hope you really took away a lot. I know I took a lot of notes. So thank you so much for your time, everyone. We hope to see you all next week when we are here with Bridget Murphy. She is a former Disney employee. She's going to be talking about the power of partnerships. This is going to be a great extension, Maryann. Once we've kind of built those meaningful relationships, how do we take those partnerships to the next step further and begin to grow our work, our business? So everyone, until then, please keep asking, keep giving, and keep growing. We hope to see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Produced by Heartcast Media.